Well, earlier today, House Speaker Mike Johnson announced he will continue his plan for a House vote on a 6-month continuing resolution, or what's called a CR, that avoids a government shutdown, and that includes the SAVE Act. Now, this requires proof of citizenship in order to register to vote. Now, a vote could take place as early as tomorrow. With some congressional observers doubting the ability of the bill to pass in the House, would Democrats allow a government shutdown just to thwart an election integrity measure? Joining me now to discuss this is Congressman Mike Waltz. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He represents the 6th Congressional District of Florida. Congressman Waltz, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good to be with you, Tony. We're on the move up here, up in Philly, getting ready for the big debate. So sorry for the backdrop, but good to be with you.
That's fine. I know you just got on the ground there. We're going to talk about that debate in just a moment. But your sense on the continuing resolution and the SAVE Act being attached to that?
Well, look, I think the leadership in the House is still really working through this with a lot of members, to be candid with you. I can tell you as one that's on a number of the national security committees, we hate continuing resolutions. It is a terrible way to deal with our budget. It essentially continues the Democrats' budgets from year before last and doesn't put in appropriate cuts. It also freezes all of the Pentagon, not just spending, but programs. They can't start any new ships or new technologies or research and development to counter China, Russia, North Korea, and our other threats. However, as I heard you when I dialed in, we have to protect our elections. We have to make sure U.S. citizens are voting, and only U.S. citizens are voting. And when you have multiple states like Texas, like Virginia, and other states scrubbing thousands and thousands of non-citizens off their voter rolls, we fear that's just the tip of the iceberg. So our message to the Democrats is going to be, look, if you agree with us that that is a fundamental core issue of our republic to have actual citizens voting, then this should be a no-brainer. And we shouldn't even be talking about shutdown. So it's going to be a perilous path ahead, Tony. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but we're fighting through that right now.
One of the things the American people have been looking for is a return to normal government, if there's such a thing as normal, but at least a budgeting process that hasn't worked in over 2 decades. The House has advanced about 3/4 of government funding over to the Senate. It's the Senate that is sitting on this. What options are available to the House at this present moment?
Yeah, we've passed, you're absolutely right, the vast majority of what we call the discretionary funding, the part that we have authorization to, that we should be absolutely cutting to get our budget in order. Heck, the Senate is doing so little, Tony. We're hearing they're not even going to vote on the defense bill, much less any of these tougher measures. So Schumer is really asleep at the switch. There are so many things he could be doing to help Israel, combating China, stopping anti-Semitism, and the list just goes on. But they would rather, really point fingers, I guess, and demonize President Trump than actually do their job and sit down with us and negotiate.
You mentioned China, the Chinese Communist Party, the focal point. Actually, today on the House floor, a number of bills that are up on suspension votes to move forward. Is this? I mean, we know that the Senate's not going to take these and move anything along these bills. They've let everything that the House has passed basically die. Is this more of drawing contrast between the two parties and, in particular, foreign policy priorities?
Well, just so your viewers, understand the dynamic. Typically, I think this Congress, we will have several hundred bills that we have in a very divided environment with a very narrow majority that we have marshaled enough votes for. The vast majority of them bipartisan, 200 to 300 that pass out of the House that just sit and die in the Senate. It's really shameful, frankly. Including the SAVE Act, which already passed in a bipartisan fashion. with a half dozen Democrats voting. That's the one that would stop non-citizens from voting in our election, ensure our election integrity. So on these bills, as it pertains to China, I just had one that passed. So this is near and dear to my heart. And it simply says if the Commerce Department, Treasury Department, the Defense Department, if they put a sanction in place, the other agencies have to at least review it and make a determination. They can't just ignore it or just not do their job and not even look at it at all. So these are really common sense measures that, for whatever reason, the Senate is just sitting on.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this a number of times privately and publicly about the threat that comes from China. And you're right, the House has constantly been drawing attention to this. But the Senate, it's the graveyard where all good bills go to die. I want to switch gears a little bit because you were a part of, I believe, the 3-year investigation into the Afghanistan withdrawal, that disastrous withdrawal. Today, Congress held a ceremony to present Congressional Gold Medals to the families of the 13 U.S. service members who were killed in that withdrawal. Give us your thoughts on this, and what lessons are there to be learned from this?
Well, I've developed a relationship with these families, as has President Trump and others. First, Tony, I want to push back on a number of Democrats saying that this investigation was political. That could not be further from the truth. If they would actually read it, they would see that this is testimony from Biden's State Department, from career foreign service officers, from military officers who were involved, from intelligence operatives. And a couple of things became very clear. Number one, Biden had decided to get everybody out come hell or high water, no matter what the conditions on the ground were from day one. And according to his State Department spokesman who testified under oath, Ned Price, that the Doha agreement that President Trump entered into was immaterial. He was getting out whether the Taliban lived up to the conditions or not. Number two, Biden on day one walked away from Trump policies like in Iran, on the border. Heck, even the Keystone XL pipeline he made go away, but yet we're to believe he was stuck with the Doha agreement. Number three, at the end of the day, President Trump left the base at Bagram. He left our intelligence operatives and he left some special operations troops because the Taliban hadn't lived up to six out of the seven of the conditions that were in that agreement. And then finally, Biden ignored his generals, ignored his diplomats, ignored the advice of his national security team, and ordered out our military before our allies and before the rest of our embassy and our civilian. It was just completely backwards. It was chaotic. It wasn't planned for. And we have these 13 dead because of it. And it was the match that lit the fuse on Ukraine, on China on the march, on the Ayatollahs and the chaos in the Middle East, because they saw weakness in this White House. All these families are asking for, Tony, is some basic accountability. Right. No one's been fired. Some transparency. They still have questions. And to get a phone call from Harris and from Biden to say, we made mistakes and we're going to ensure that we learn the lessons from it so this never happens again. Those are very basic fundamental things that they're not getting. And Harris, for one, either she was a wallflower and she was just asleep at the switch as vice president, or she was at the table. Which was it? You can't be both. Well,
I would hope that this also brings a focus to the voters that foreign policy matters and that this is something we've got to learn from and got to get right in the future. And speaking of that, we've just got about 45 seconds left. You're in Philadelphia for the debate tonight. What do you anticipate from tonight's presidential debate?
Well, this is going to be a contrast of President Trump's policies that worked on the border, on the economy, on crime, and on keeping the peace around the world. And then we'll see which Kamala Harris shows up. Is it Vice President Harris that embraces Biden's policies and tries to spin that they're successful? Or is it, her trying to look forward with new policies? Well, I would call that California Kamala, because California is the canary in the coal mine of what progressive policies will get us if we continue down this path. And I think when they contrast that with what worked under President Trump, it'll be very crystal clear for the American people.
Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence to draw contrast from. Congressman Mike Waltz, always great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Thank you, Tony.